Welcome to Season 3 of the Climate Conscious Podcast. I'm your host, Derval Barzey, bringing awareness to climate change and sustainable development from a Caribbean perspective. Connecting you to sustainability solutions as we move from awareness to action. Today's special guest is an MIT-trained mechanical engineer. She is now the lecturer for renewable energy at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill, specializing in renewable energy and applied mechanics. Her areas of research include sustainable energy sources in the Caribbean, such as biofuel, ocean thermal energy conversion, and wave energy. I am delighted to welcome to the Climate Conscious Podcast, Dr. Legena Henry. Hi, Dr. Henry.
Hi, it's good to be here.
Thanks for joining me. How are things over in BIM?
Things are good. Things are opening back up. We had a lockdown early in the year, and then we had some ashes coming over to Barbados from the last super-year eruption in St. Vincent. So we had a hard start to the year in Barbados, but I think we are doing okay now. The kids are back out in school. People are getting vaccinated. So things are slowly opening back up.
Well, that's good to hear. So, Legena, here in the region, most of us would be familiar with the signature drink of rum and coke. But you and your undergrad students are serving up a drink of Rum Sargassum.
Yeah. Thanks for getting me joke in that. We are looking at producing biomethane, and the name of the company that we coined this Rum Sargassum as a name of the company. And thought it was kind of funny, but the main emphasis is taking up this invasive seaweed species that's coming into our waters in massive amounts and making something positive in a way that has massive impact on the presence of the seaweed in the Caribbean Sea. So I know there are solutions that exist now for use of the sargassum seaweed in agriculture. Some people are using it as a fertilizer. Some people are using it as feedstock for ruminants. Our solution is to power something large scale like a transport sector using biomethane produced from anaerobic digestion of sargassum. And the hope is a large scale solution like that, which is low carbon emissions, good for the environment, being driven by a big need will make a big dent in the volumes of sargassum in the Caribbean Sea in a way that helps the tourism sector. Right now, tourism is suffering from the big mounds of sargassum on the beaches. And we've seen real economic fallout because of the presence of sargassum on beaches. So the hope is to go big and make a big dent in that reality.
Well, I fully support that mission in terms of going big and having a big impact. Sargassum has been plaguing the region for some time, and we've been seeing the upsurge over the years. Mm-hmm. And it's not just an eyesore when it lands on our beaches, but as you said, it impacts livelihoods that are dependent on tourism and fishing.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited when I heard that we have this local solution being developed within the region to address this. It's a big problem. So how did this solution originate?
Yes, that's a nice story. So in summer 2019, I started a program, Renewable Energy Research for Undergraduates. It's called REREU, Research Experience in Renewable Energy for Undergrads. And I had 5 students working with me at UWI Cave Hill. And we started this summer saying, well, the main research question that was kind of around in the air around that time in my space as a renewable energy lecturer in UWI Cave Hill was the transportation sector has to make this transition. So sorry, I need to step back 2 steps. Barbados is on a path. There's a policy, a national policy of Barbados, to be 100% fossil fuel free and carbon neutral by the year 2020. And
2020?
2030,
okay.
sorry, 2030. So I'm sitting in 2019 at my desk in Cave Hill and thinking, this is 10 and a half years away. Wow. What's going to happen with the transportation sector? So we do have this penetration of electric vehicles in Barbados, which I noticed first thing when I got here, there were more electric cars here in January 2019 than were in Trinidad. And it's just more of a normal thing for an average person to be driving around in an electric car. When I looked more closely at that, it seems, so the penetration is about less than 500 electric cars in Barbados, because Barbados is smaller than Trinidad. I noticed the electric cars here. Fine. But the fact is, you're seeing little glimmers of the transition starting to happen. And I probed the idea of, so is it that everybody's going to be driving an electric car in 2030 in Barbados? And the answer was no. The persons driving the electric cars are more likely upper middle class and wealthier people. Electric cars are still not reachable by the average person, the average salary. If you think of what the average salary of a Bajan is, using economic indicators and looking at that, that person can't buy an electric car. So what was the solution? Biofuel seemed like the next best thing. So I said, okay, we're going to call it Renewable Energy Research Experience for undergraduates. We're going to get some of the more promising students I taught that semester, ask them to come and work with me. I will get funding for their stipends from the IDB, which I got. And we'll sit down, we'll do some lit review and some secondary data analysis and get to some kind of answer about what is needed for biofuels to power, let's say, 80% of the cars in Barbados now. We started this summer looking at sugarcane because Brazil is a good regional example of using sugarcane to power a transport sector. They do. 2/3 of, or something like 70% of the transportation in Brazil is powered by sugarcane. So I thought, well, there's all these cane fields around Barbados. When you drive through Barbados, it feels like driving through central Trinidad where you see all the cane fields.
Yeah,
you kind of get to a point, you get to Carney and beyond, and you just see this expanses of flat land with cane fields and memories of our past economy. And it's similar, and more so in Barbados, that much of the island you drive around and you see flat expanses of cane fields. And so my assumption was sugarcane is probably even bigger in Barbados in the economy than it was in Trinidad, because of course Carney shut down. But no, when we probed, we saw a sugar sector, a sugarcane economy that had been dwindling for the past 50 years, been getting smaller and smaller, the output less and less, the economic outputs of the sugar industry in Barbados. And that the sugar industry is tottering on imploding, possibly. That the sugar being produced in Barbados is not as it used to be 50 years ago. It doesn't mean as much to the economy of this country as it did 50 years ago. Then we looked at the raw numbers, taking the 2017 production of sugar, 2007 production, and scaling the last 10 years over that production in 2007. And it looked, the downward, the decline is visible compared to what's happening with sugar production in Brazil, which has been growing for many decades. For economic, you can see why, right? I mean, I'm sure there's debates in Brazil between the Amazon and cane fields, maybe. On any given day in Brazil, the average sugar estate in Brazil is bigger than Barbados. On any given day in Brazil, the leadership in companies, the sugar companies, wake up and look at the stocks and they think, what should we decide? Should we produce energy today or sugar today? And they make decisions. They're so big, they can make decisions on a weekly, daily basis to produce sugar or to produce energy based on what is the economic best decision. So that kind of economic ecosystem is what Brazil has power in 70% of their transport sector with cane, and the environment in Barbados is very different. So basically, after about 2.5 weeks, we're starting to turn off for the idea of the sugar industry supporting transport. The Brazilian transportation sector being driven by sugarcane is actually ethanol is the main product coming out of the sugarcane that they use to mix with the gasoline and have these mixes of gasoline ethanol for driving their cars. When we looked at that specific process and said, okay, let's pretend Bajans decided we're not drinking no more sugar. Let's just take all the sugar output from the year 2017, because this was summer 2019 and 2017 was the most recent number we had at that point. So we said, let's look at the output of 2017 in Barbados. How much of the driving around that happened in 2018 by the transport sector? So we calculated and did some numbers. This is how much energy Barbados needed in terms of gasoline in 2018 for driving. And then we said, this is how much ethanol the sugar industry would have produced if we took that whole crop and made it into ethanol. And the answer was 6%. The sugar produced in Barbados in 2017 would have only fueled 6% of the driving that happened in Barbados in 2018. So those numbers were daunting. Those were not the kinds of numbers. We were going after 80% of the driving, not 6%. So in 2.5 weeks into our investigation, we said, all right, sugar is not the answer. Now what?
So you gave us a good context in terms of the biofuel or the bioethanol market in Brazil. The issue of biofuels and, making that decision between sugar versus energy, and you get into that complicated realm of food versus energy and why biofuels could be a bit problematic.
Yeah. And especially for us, because Brazil, beautiful, wonderful, congrats Brazil, but we are small island developing states. We have serious issues in terms of what is the land going to be used for sustainably. And so when you have a tiny little island where I wasn't joking when I said the average sugar industrial sugarcane setup in Brazil is actually bigger. There's cane fields in Brazil the size of Barbados. When you have a small island where more of the legal territory of this, in fact, the legal territory of Barbados is 500 times more water than land. When you think of what is Barbados, legally speaking, look at it in its entirety and look at the whole exclusive economic zone and the land mass. You have 500 times more ocean than land here. And that's true of many Caribbean nations. For Trinidad, it's 70 times. For Trinidad and Tobago, it's 70 times more water than land.
Which makes the blue economy even more valuable.
Yeah, it's actually, if you really look at the full extent, the full ability, and the full potential of the blue economy for our small island developing states, they're greater than what we have on land, number one. Number two, when you look at Barbados and step back and look at it from the standpoint of this is actually all of this space, not just that little tiny land mass, but and all this ocean, then it looks like not this tiny little state, but it looks like, let's say we were comparing France and Barbados. Barbados will start approaching something like 1/3 of the economy of France, versus we think of Barbados as a tiny little island, cutesy little beaches and coconut trees and happy islanders smiling at tourists. It's not true. We are comparable economy to one of these smaller of the bigger countries when you step back and look at it from the standpoint of look at the whole thing, look at the blue economy. Right. And so for me, a lot of my work has been looking at the marine space for energy options. And I would tell the government, go out in the ocean and generate the power, the solar power, the wind power, get OTEC, But now I'm telling everybody get the biofuel from the ocean too, because we
Right. So that's what I wanted
want
to
yeah,
get
exactly.
to.
We
So
don't want to compete with food for agricultural land space. Let's just get the biomass from the ocean.
right. So y'all were exploring using sugarcane to generate biofuels, and you realize, okay, that wouldn't work in our local situation, given our constraints in terms of land space and also food security. So what did you go to next?
Well, one of my students was driving home on a maxi, which is in Barbados is called the van, and she looked out the window when they got to the south coast, and she saw mountains of sargassum, and she saw workers shoveling sargassum, and she just had a moment of why not try sargassum? Why not look at that as a feedstock? So she came to my office the next morning, breathing heavy and excited. She's like, Dr. Henry, why don't we look at sargassum? And I was like, okay. You know what? You're so excited about this idea that I wouldn't have to push you for the next 10 weeks. You're going to push yourself on that same passion I'm seeing on your face right now. So yes, let's look at sargassum. And she's a biology undergraduate. My training is as a mechanical engineer. So she is biology. The first thing she thought is let's run tests on sargassum. And I thought, great, beautiful. So we hooked up with Dr. Holder, who was then still Mr. Holder, Nikolai Holder at UW Cave Hill. He actually runs a biogas operation on campus where they use grass cuttings from 3 years ago that the workers just cut the grass, and he took 2 barrels of the grass and started up a biomethane plant on campus. And for the past 2 years, they've been using just the grass cuttings, the biomethane coming out of it, to burn the Bunsen burners in the chemistry labs on campus. So he's a biochemist, so he's into, like, he makes his own whiskey and he does all kind of cool things using biochemistry, and one of them is anaerobic digestion. So Nikolai, Brittany worked with Nikolai for the next few weeks using his micro digesters, anaerobic digesters. She had probably about 100 of them on a lab desktop and was running iterated experiments on the sargassum seaweed to produce biomethane. One of the issues, though, is Barbados is water scarce, and anaerobic digestion takes a lot of water. So another MIT graduate in Barbados, her name is Miss Felicia Cox. She works at Barbados National Oil Company. She kind of pointed us in the direction of rum distillery waste and other industrial wastewater as the main, because you need a lot of water, some kind of water content for anaerobic digestion. So she suggested, look at the rum distillery waste, look at brewery waste. So we got in touch. We actually, Brittany started spearheading a lit review and realized rum distillery waste would have been the most prolific industrial waste for anaerobic digestion. To produce the most biomethane, use rum distillery waste. She showed us in the literature, and we thought, okay, sure. So we got in touch with 2 of the bigger rum distilleries in Barbados, Mount Gay and also Foursquare, and we met with their leadership, and they were happy to hear what we're doing, happy to be called, and that we came to meet with them, and happy to give us rum distillery waste that we used to run experiments that summer too with the sargassum. So our experiments were co-digestions of sargassum and rum distillery waste with other natural sources of bacteria, and we got very promising results out of those experiments. Why did I say promising? Is that we got more biomethane out of the sargassum co-digested with the industrial wastewater than Nikolai would have gotten when he was testing the grasses that the government of Barbados is projecting to grow for biomethane. So they have some types of grass that they are like, if we go biofuel, we could grow these types of grass to produce energy, mimicking what they're doing in Ireland now, which is growing grass for energy. When we compared sargassum with those grasses, there was more methane out of the sargassum than the grasses at the microdigester level, meaning that it's not some kind of pie in the sky solution we're coming up with. The feedstock that we've tested is comparing well with expert made decisions by the government of Barbados about which grasses would have been best if they went in the direction of biofuel.
Wow, we have a lot to unpack there from this discussion. But what is clear is that we have indigenous R&D happening at Cave Hill that is offering us what seems to be a viable solution to address the issue of waste, bio-waste. But, one might ask, how feasible is it given that the presence of the sargassum seaweed on our shores appears to be intermittent?
Good. I like that question. And it's a question that came up a couple times because I've been making the rounds in terms of panels. And the question came up, I don't see the sargassum on the beach every day. What's going to happen on the days there's no sargassum on the beach? And I'm saying we as locals who go to the beach and we see the beach and we see sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. All we're seeing is the beach, which is a tiny percentage of the entire exclusive economic zone of any country, of Trinidad, certainly of Barbados, of Grenada, wherever we are, and saying, well, I don't see sargassum every day. What is wrong with you? You're not going to drive on days they don't have sargassum. The actual truth is within the exclusive economic zone, which goes way past just the beach, there's tons of this seaweed, number one. Number two, there's scientists at the University of Maryland and elsewhere that project, two labs produce predictions of how sure are we that this thing is going to keep coming, and should we be worried? And I guess it was from the standpoint of, this is a crisis. Is it going to get worse? Is it here to stay? And the answer is the sargassum is here to stay. The sargassum is going to grow and become more and more. And the thing fueling it is actually the process of development. So why do I say this? The sargassum has always come across the Atlantic Ocean from West Africa, the coast of West Africa, into the Caribbean region. The first person to record having seen it was Christopher Columbus. It's been around for a long time. But in the massive amounts we've seen, when now we are the new Sargasso Sea, it's not up there in the North Atlantic anymore, basically. That new inundation into the Caribbean Sea actually happens at Brazil. So you have the sargassum traveling across the Atlantic Ocean, hitting South America by all the big river runoffs around Brazil. Because of the trend of development around the river banks, there's been an irreversible increase in runoff and nutrients coming into the river, the big rivers in South America. So there's all this nutrition in the ocean right where the sargassum hits. And so that's what causes the big bloom. And then the currents take it northward into the Caribbean Sea. So you get this massive upsurge of the sargassum after it crosses the Atlantic and it gets to South America. And it's nice and warm and perfect temperature, perfect nutrient environment. It just blossoms. Then you have similar trends happening around the Caribbean Sea basin and runoff from the continental runoff. So basically, the scientists the teams consisting of physical oceanographers, chemical oceanographers, biological oceanographers, and data expertise look at it and make predictions that, it's here to stay, it's here to get worse. In fact, we actually at UWI Cave Hill receive weekly bulletins on what the sargassum is going to be like on the beaches around. But beyond just the beach, which is what we're used to as locals, the whole exclusive economic zone is where we're talking about harvesting the sargassum. And there's not going to be a shortage.
Scientists have said it's better for us to collect the sargassum offshore before it makes landfall, because that's where it will have a more negative impact. So I think there's some technology being developed to be able to harvest the sargassum offshore.
Right. So I've been in a few meetings too recently talking about harvesting, and the major group right now in the region that seem to be gung-ho about harvesting it is among the ruminant agriculture farmers, because they're producing feedstock for the animals using sargassum. And the vessels being earmarked for use in the Caribbean Sea are being produced in Mexico to collect it. Something like you could collect, I saw one of the small ones collecting between 5 to 10 tons a day, I think, of the sargassum. So then I've been approached by a team in the Dominican Republic that designed a collection system in collaboration with a team at MIT, where they produce these little devices that a pirogue, you can put it on a fishing pirogue, and a fisherman manually harvest the sargassum, which I think seems like a nice environmentally safe solution too. So there's you've seen different kinds of technology. I know right now the government of Barbados purchased a vessel that harvests sargassum, and then I think they're trying to figure out the process again, the sargassum off the vessel to somewhere usable in the right time, and because they don't want it to start degenerating on the harvester. Yeah, so it's a whole process, it's a whole logistical process, and there's a few people looking into it. There's a group in St. Lucia, a young entrepreneur in St. Lucia, started a company where he's successfully selling and distributing, producing, selling fertilizer from sargassum. And so obviously in St. Lucia, they've figured out a way to harvest it in a way that's sustainable for the running of this young man's business. So I actually trying to set up a meeting to talk with them about that, how they've been managing the logistics of harvesting sargassum. And they seem like also potential business partners where we could give them some of our byproducts from the anaerobic digestion, because we do end up with one byproduct that could be used as an agricultural product. So yeah, a circular type economy setup, I could see it being generated in this whole process too. Because we're not the only ones interested in sargassum, and so I just want it to be zero sum. I would love if it could be carbon neutral and that no waste, that everything we produce is being used somehow.
Right. So we're confident in the availability of the feedstock.
Yeah.
Are there any other limiting factors to the commercialization of this concept?
So that's what we're trying to figure out. And I think the best way to do that, I have 3 kids, and the kids show it to you best. My son is always experimenting with something around the house. Every time he goes quiet for too long, I go, anybody saw the quarry recently? Because he's always trying some kind of experiment. If it's in the backyard, in the kitchen, not fun. But the fact is, he's illustrating a principle which we could use. Dive in, test it, try it, figure out what are the limitations. So our hope because we're moving towards commercializing the solution, and our approach to it is to start small and use the starting small to generate data on every part of the process, and generate data on the actual production of the biomethane, the data on the actual driving of a car on biofuel that came out of the biomethane from sargassum. So yes, so we're going to generate that kind of data, but we also want to generate data on the logistics of the supply chain, the logistics of using the byproducts for agriculture. How much, what is an aspect of the chain we didn't think of? So we started in micro digesters, and this summer we're moving up to 5,000 liters. to just get data from that system. And I hope to be driving a car on the same 5,000 liter system by the end of the year. We have some leads into a local CNG cars that we could potentially use. By the end of the year, we want to move this thing into commercial mode. So we want to do about 100 CNG conversions locally and spend 6 months generating data from that, and making a small profit and looking at how the numbers turn around. So I guess we started tiny at the microdigester level. We're moving up this summer to 5,000 liters and producing some experimental data. And then I hope a year from now that we will be kind of implementing things towards a 100 car pilot where we'll test this business idea and then move forward from there.
So is it that existing CNG vehicles would be able to use this biofuel?
Yes, in fact, biomethane in a CNG car is better for the car than the natural gas from the ground, because biomethane is pure methane, is nothing else. When you get methane gas, natural gas from the ground is mostly methane, but it has other things in it. And remember, this is fossil fuel, so it is like, it mixes and it's kind of unpredictable almost, and you have to kind of figure out, well, what kind of natural gas we get from this well, and maybe put it through some refining process to get it to a certain percent methane. But for the biofuel process, we can, once you scrub the gas, which is you're using a chemical scrubber, sodium hydroxide, you get out most of the carbon dioxide and you're left with methane, which you compress that, and it can be used to drive a CNG car, which is compressed natural gas drivetrain. Yeah. So yeah, all we have to do is the typical CNG kit conversion that is happening all the time in Trinidad, and plan to get 100 cars through people who are sympathetic to the idea of renewable energy, which is widespread in Barbados. We are gonna try to work with people who have fleets and get 100 cars in our pilot running on the sargassum seaweed. And the thing is, the plan is try to start with even natural gas in Barbados. If we have with a little, little startup issues in terms of, again, the gas volumes up, we could safely start the pilot, getting the cars converted and everything, and start with the natural gas that we have in Barbados, and eventually transition to fully gas from sargassum seaweed and distillery wastewater.
So what's the carbon footprint like with the sargassum biofuel?
Right. Okay, so when you talk about carbon footprint, because methane is CH4, right? So there's carbon in, I think it's C4H4. There's carbon in methane, and methane actually puts more carbon into the atmosphere than carbon dioxide, because there's more carbon atoms in
it has a higher warming potential.
Yeah, because it's more carbon atoms in the methane than carbon atoms in CO2. Carbon atoms in the molecule. Yeah. But the thing is this: when we talk about emissions and carbon emissions and global warming, we're talking about carbon that in the natural systems of Earth, millennia ago, she put away that carbon naturally. And she said, all right, I'm done with you. Go down there, under there in the fossils. Rot, never see you again. Peace out. And that was that. So by natural processes of nature, carbon is kind of removed from the biosphere. The biosphere is where we live. The biosphere is what you're seeing when you look out your window. The biosphere is the plants, the trees, our atmosphere now, where we live. We live in the biosphere layer when you think of the earth in layers. And so the fossil fuels is carbon that was put away by natural processes. at the Industrial Revolution in the 1850s, I guess, when oil started to shoot up, what it is that some bright person found carbon the earth had already by natural processes put away and said, forget it's there. And said, oh, wow, look, carbon, it's right here. And then they started digging up fossil fuels, carbon that was put away by natural processes. So now we have something like 5 atmospheres worth of carbon in the present modern atmosphere than what would be naturally okay by nature. And that's bad, introducing old carbon back into our biosphere. It's not good. When we burn fossil fuels from sargassum, seaweed, and we get methane out of green things that grow on Earth now, we're not actually introducing new carbon into the biosphere. So that's called carbon neutral. That process is using carbon that was already by nature in the biosphere. And that's better than much of what's going on now when you look out your window, which is cars driving around on carbon that was pulled back out of retirement. But there's also an emissions process of the upstream. Yeah, the next part of your question, and I think that's where you were going at, is what are the upstream emissions? So for every so-called green solution, like I want to put solar PV panels on my house, yeah, I want to buy an electric car, yeah, I want to use the black screen on Facebook so I could use less light and that's lower carbon emissions. People have all of these green, quote unquote, solutions to things. And the question is, you should always ask, what is the upstream carbon emissions of this solution? So for example, the cobalt, all the things needed to build an electric car and the industrial process producing an electric car, that's not emissions free. Right now that produces carbon emissions. So you can't drive around an electric car thinking this is zero emissions. It's not true, because there would have been emissions to produce the electric car, for example. So in terms of this process, producing biomethane from sargassum, we have to ask, are we putting carbon in the atmosphere while we harvest the seaweed? Are we using gasoline to harvest the seaweed? Are we using gasoline to drive from the coast to the production plant? And so you're looking at the whole process, and every step of the way, you have to have principles of sustainability in that process.
What I particularly love about this solution is that it's a Caribbean-based solution that addresses a Caribbean problem. Generally, we tend to import technology, but here we have developed a homegrown solution that we can even export to any other region that may be facing this challenge. So that brings me to the point of, we in the region being able to I guess, dig deep and find solutions to our sustainability issues, and having that confidence to explore and to experiment, as you said, start small and then scale up. What are some of the things you think would encourage more of this within the region?
So I studied in the US, and in that environment, they have this connection they make between the thinkers and the universities and the economy. So a lot of money is invested from the national budget and the national economy. A lot of investment is made in the plight of research and development, and the university, the state college system, all these big state universities, produce truth and produce knowledge with this understanding nationally that we produce knowledge to build the economy, to produce knowledge to build the economy, and that is the United States. I mean, people go up in arms about the massive U.S. military budget, but when I was at MIT, you walk through the labs and through the corridor. You walk through the corridor, that lab is military funded, that lab is military funded, that lab is military funded. And so part of that military, quote unquote, military budget is actually research that benefits other parts of the US and the rest of the world, using some of the findings and the technological advancements. Similarly, I think we need to adopt that mentality not 100% of all of the culture, but the mentality of, we have issues and we have questions and we have bright people at our universities. Let's invest in solutions coming out of there. I think that is probably an approach to take by our CARICOM and our heads of governments. And we need to have systems that don't stifle tech advancements because of politics, but some ways that we could continue to advance as governments change and as regimes change and things march forward in that part of life, that the research doesn't suffer and that research is funded, and students at the university level are encouraged to generate solutions. So that's why I started Renewable Energy Research Experience for undergraduate. The spirit of what it was being done was encourage these students that they can be producers of knowledge, they can be producers of solutions for their own region, that they don't have to wait on somebody external to come and solve the problems for them, but that they could say, I studied this, I know how to set up a lab, let me try. And I think that's nice on the level of you're in the university, but we need the governments behind it, and we need the international funders behind it to encourage more innovation that starts whom for whom. Yeah, I agree with you. We are consumers of solutions that are generated outside of our region, and we need to produce these solutions more.
Definitely. I think that is what will take us forward as we are on the sustainability transition, the willingness to try, but also support mechanisms from the various stakeholders. And so I'm always really excited when I hear about solutions that have originated within the region. There's a lot happening, and I'm very happy to use my platform to bring awareness to what is being developed right within the region.
Excellent. And I agree that we need champions. It needs to be out there in the space. Public education is important. People knowing, young people moving, and you want to encourage young people to say, yeah, I want to be a research scientist, and I don't want to work in Washington, D.C. at NREL. I want to work in Barbados at the Barbados National Energy Company. And so we need this kind of turning of the tides and reversal of brain drain so that we could have some brain gain. And I think part of it is podcasts like these, getting the ideas out there.
Well, thank you so much, Legena, for being part of that change and for encouraging and facilitating research and development and in the region, and really supporting young minds in exploring ideas.
That's my favorite part of this job.
For me, like, I have this pet peeve, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but sometimes I say not another foreign consultant. Because we are awash with them. And yes, I believe in partnerships, of course, and we do need to leverage, what our international partners have developed.
Yeah.
But we are best able to analyze our local context and our challenges that are
certainly
peculiar to our size or culture, So
yes,
I think we have to have a bit more confidence in our abilities and be willing to try, be willing to fail. That's all part of it.
Yes.
And really push for new ideas and new solutions, like this cocktail of Rum Sargassum.
Exactly.
So where can listeners connect with you and follow up on the development of this exciting solution?
Great. So we're actually in the process of putting together a website. But for now, people can email me, legena.henry@cavehill.ue.edu. I'm on Twitter @Legena. So I post little things on Twitter from time to time. But we have a website that's in the making now, and I expect one of my projects this summer is to get it up and off the ground.
I want to thank you for joining me today to discuss this exciting Caribbean-based solution.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And keep, I think this podcast is excellent, and I think keep doing what you're doing, Derval.
Thank you for listening to the Climate Conscious Podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe and connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at The Climate Conscious. And be sure to check out the Climate Conscious Lifestyle Kit.